Hey, it's Patrick and Clark again. Another episode of Friendly Conversations. I'm joined by Brian Friend as usual, and we have a special guest, our first guest ever, Mr. John Young. How you doing, John?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
You're our first friend.
Oh, please don't say it like that. So
What an honor! What an honor! So you're probably wondering why John is joining us. Well, John and Brian have known for their debates that they've had on and their varying opinions when it comes to athletes programming. Well, that's why we brought him on because obviously we're continuing our series of the top athletes in different eras. So we're starting off with the Carson era, and yeah, so that's why I brought John. John has a different list than Brian in some places. We're going to debate over that. I'm going to sit here and moderate. But before we get into that, Brian, you have anything you want to say?
Yeah, first of all, great to have John on the show. Hopefully you guys have maybe seen some of the stuff we've done in the past, and I think it's going to be a fun conversation here. This is going to be pretty raw. We haven't really had too much back and forth, and so I hope you guys enjoy the content. Additionally, if you're not already following our stuff, make sure you do that. If you haven't had an opportunity to check out B.Friendlyfitness.com, head over there. There will be some articles accompanying the video component of this, so you can kind of read through and follow along. And of course, if you haven't yet supported us on Patreon, it's the best way to support all of the content and initiatives that we have. So, thank you to those who are doing so, and anyone else who's interested. A little bit goes a long way. So we appreciate all the support.
Yeah. So again, I second that. I appreciate that. Thanks for doing that, Brian. So, John, I'm going to lay down the rules. There are no rules.
Okay.
Just because this is Brian's platform, don't take it easy on him. I'm not going to step in. I'm going to let you guys go at it. If you guys need me to chime in, I will. But I'm just here basically facilitating the thing. So let's get at it. So again, this is our CrossFit Games Carson Era top 30 men. So we're going to be ranking 30 men, or Brian and John are going to be ranking 30 men. And so let's go ahead and pull up the list and we'll get started.
In Carson Era, this is 2010 to 2016, correct? The year's only 2010 to 2016.
Correct.
Yeah, I would say there's not quite zero rules. So we did, if you've seen already, we did a ranch era. We had only 10 athletes. There were only 3 years, and we qualified that it was only what they did during those 3 years. So a good example is Jason Kalipa. He obviously competed in the ranch era for 3 years, but anything that he did there is not relevant for this. This is the Carson era, so it's only the years of 2010 to 2016, 7 opportunities. Some guys are there for all of them. Some guys are there for one of them, and trying to kind of balance out how to evaluate people who competed a different number of times at different periods as the competition evolved over that 7-year period of time. Some of the stuff that we'll get into and break down today. The articles came out 30, counting down to 1. Today, we're going to start at the top and work our way down from there. You see, we have a little bit of color coding here. John, you and I made these lists completely independently of each other. And when we saw them, Rich Froning, Ben Smith, Mat Fraser, Jason Kalipa, in that order are the top 4 that both of us selected. Why did you choose to have those guys in that order? And was it difficult for you at any point amongst just those 4 guys to make that decision?
Well, anybody who knows who my favorites are, it hurt me dearly to put Mat Fraser as a third. But Rich Froning obviously owns this era. He won 4 different times. He is the king of Carson, if you want to word it like that. There's
I like that.
Untouchable that Rich Froning is number 1. Where it gets dicey is who's number 2. So Fraser was there for 3 years. He had a second, and then the most dominating first anybody wants to see. Okay, and then Ben Smith was there every year. Ben Smith was always just Ben Smith. He was 8th in 2010, and then he won in 2015. He was 2nd in 2016, 2nd in 2014, or third in 2013. He's hit every spot you want to hit. And I mean, the reason he's second is because he was there every year. It is the Carson era. I cannot use, if Mat Fraser retired in 2016, who would have the greater resume? And Ben Smith would have the better resume. If he didn't win 2015, and he beat Mat Fraser in this era, if we want to really talk about it, he beat Mat Fraser. I know Mat Fraser wasn't the monster we know him today, But if anything, I should thank Ben Smith because we wouldn't have Mat Fraser if it wasn't for him beating him in 2015. So honestly, I don't even think you can argue that Ben Smith is not second between the two of those guys. Once you break down what they did in Carson, and then for me, like, I mean, Mat Fraser and Khalipa has done more in this era than anybody that wasn't Rich or Ben. He's just not at the level that Mat Fraser is at, and so that's why he's fourth. And I like that we both had them 1 through 4 because there was a clear tier break after this, and I think you would agree with that too, Brian.
Yeah, I think that's all very well said. Just in case you guys haven't seen the full picture, Ben Smith by year 8th, 3rd, 11th, 3rd, 7th, 1st, and 2nd during this time period. Although he had 7 years to Matt's second, he had 3 event wins during this time. Matt only had 2. And I think that it's a good example for kind of where we're going to go with this list, where you do have to balance the longevity and the excellence over a long period of time, and weighing that against someone who obviously was also consistently excellent, like Matt was. Second, and first is clearly incredible. But 7 years in this sport is something that, a lot of people don't ever even reach that duration, and to have all 11th place finishes, to continually be getting better during an era where the competition is also continually getting better. There's a lot to say for Ben in that regard. I totally agree that these are the top 4 guys. And kind of in that same vein, the next 4 guys, we had the same 4, but not in the same order. And so I think this is quite clearly the second tier. We'll name the 4 guys. You can see them there in purple. John's list is on the left. So he had Josh Bridges, then Graham Holmberg, then Scott Panchik, and finally Dan Bailey. The funny thing is we didn't actually have any one of these guys in the same order, even though they're the exact same guys. I had Scott, then Josh, then Dan, then Graham. Our objective today is not to have 2 separate lists, though. This is the process that we went through live that you guys are watching to decide the order for this era. So right now our job, John, is to have a little debate and sort these guys out 5 through 8. We'll just start with Josh. What made you think that he was best amongst this group?
So Josh has the best finish other than Graham in this group. He was second in 2011. Is that right? Second in 2011? Am I seeing this right? Yes, second in 2011. And he has 8 event wins. Josh is like he's a home run hitter of home run hitters. He's the first little guy that could actually take it to the big guys. I know we love Chris Spieler, but Chris Spieler won the cardio event and nothing else. Like Josh Bridges, like if you think of CrossFit, you think of historic people or icons in the sport. Josh Bridges is amongst those people. If Mount Rushmore had 4 heads, like a guy Mount Rushmore and a girl Mount Rushmore, I think Josh Bridges would be on the guy Mount Rushmore. Wow. Just as far as icons go, okay. I know he never won, but I think he's hard to beat. And if you look at him versus Scott, like let's just take him versus Scott because that's the argument right here, right? For you, because you have Scott Panchik 5th. Mm-hmm. Right? Scott Panchik never made it on a podium. We know this. Okay, he's very consistently the 4th or 5th best guy at the games, right? So Josh Bridges had a higher placement, way more event wins, and then the only thing against him is that he was 1 less year than Scott, and he was 2nd, 7th, 4th, 13th for Scott's 4th, 4th, 5th, 6th, 6th. I don't think there's a question that Josh Bridges is ahead of Scott Panchik here. Like if you think of moments, right? Push pull is like.
Well, let's just pause there for a sec. So first of all, in the situation today where John and I can't decide on a discrepancy. So let's say between Josh and Scott, neither one of us is willing to give an inch. Patrick, you're going to be the deciding vote. So as we're having this conversation, be ready to make your decision. And by the way, if you go with me too often, John's going to get angry.
Well, I mean, let's hear what you have to say, but I have to say,
we're not there. We're not there yet.
John has really put up a really good argument for Josh already.
Absolutely.
Push pull and Murph alone should put him above Scott Panchik.
And that's good. We're going to bookmark that thought for a second. So just in case people are unaware, in the history of the CrossFit Games, Mat Fraser has 29 event wins. Rich Froning has 16. And still in 2023, 3rd on that list is Josh Bridges. And I think that there's something really important that John makes a point of here is that Josh was unlike Chris Spieler, was capable of winning a variety of different events. Now, he did have some things that he clearly stood out on, running being amongst them. He won in 2011 the Beach. In 2013, he wins Naughty Nancy, which had a good amount of running in it. And obviously in 2016, he wins Murph. So those, maybe there's some similarities there, but those are still different time domains, still spanning over across 6 different years. In addition to those events, he wins in 2011 the triplet sprint and dog sled. In 2013, legless, an iconic event, and 2007 throwback. And then he wins push-pull in 2014. On the event side of things, on the moment side of things, absolutely, Josh Bridges is iconic, legendary, and clearly deserves to be high on this list. The reason that I ended up putting Scott Panchik ahead of him is because this is just the ultimate testament to consistency. And it's really difficult to find like the nuanced difference here. Josh, I would say one other thing, he part of his career was kind of cut short because he had to go do some military service at times, and you don't really want to hold that against him. But over 4 years, relative to Scott, he does have one finish that's better than Scott has ever finished at the CrossFit Games. He's got a fourth. Scott has 2 fourths. The next 3 best finishes, 5th, 6th, and 6th for Scott, are better than Josh's 7th and 13th. And so in 5 consecutive years at the games, Scott's able to maintain that 4th, 5th, 6th finish. It is getting slightly worse each year, but we mentioned the field is also getting slightly stronger. For example, in 2014, 15, and 16, Mat Fraser enters the equation. He steals 1 spot from Scott Panchik in each of those years. Otherwise, maybe it's 4th, 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 5th, 5th. And I
would look at it the exact same way as it is now.
Meaning,
like that 5th to 6th doesn't mean anything. In my opinion, it is the pinnacle of consistency. That means Scott never got better versus peers.
And Josh was
always
and,
the
and what are you going to say
same.
about Josh? That he was consistently getting worse?
No, but he was better than everybody for a minute. That's not named Rich Froning. Like Josh Bridges can beat you. Like Scott can't. Scott is a worse Justin Medeiros.
Right.
And there's a reason I don't like or root for Justin, because he doesn't win events. Scott's worse than that, but he's 5th in the total, which means he's 8th in every event.
Yeah, and so the last thing I'll say about Scott, because clearly I'm going to stick with Scott Panchik in the 5 side here. John has very compelling and strong argument for Josh, is that they did compete head-to-head at the games 3 times. Did I get that right? 3 times. Scott got him in 2013. Josh gets him by 1 spot in 2014, and Scott gets him again in 2016 by 6th to 13th. So 2-1 in the head-to-head, more consistent over the totality, more years represented at the games. Josh has a better overall finish in one individual year, far leg up on the event wins. Patrick, who's going to be 5? Who's going to be 6?
I think. Hold on. Before he says
that,
I think if Panchik had 1 3rd place, I can put him over Josh. Because I think making the podium, and you'll see this later on the list, is a big deal. Or winning. Making the podium or winning. That's why I'm going to have Graham Homework 6th. Preview to the next 1 minute.
I don't think there's necessarily a wrong choice here, but Patrick, you have to make the choice.
I'm going to have to go with Josh just because during this time, he was full-time active duty Navy SEAL. So he's training, but his he's going through so much right now, and he was deployed, like you said. He had injuries that he had on duty that actually took him out of some of those years, and who knows, they were probably affecting him. So we talk about, yes, Scott's so consistent across the board, but imagine if you took Josh and put him in Scott's situation, how much better Josh would be. If
Josh was 5'8" instead of 5'4", I agree. I think it'd be amazing.
Well, not just that,
win the game.
But I'm just saying, if Josh was, running a gym, training full time, and that was his only job, I mean, I don't think any of us would argue that Josh would be the better athlete of the two during this era. So that's how I'm kind of looking at it. But I also like the iconic moments. Being a military person myself, I know I'm kind of biased when it comes to that. But when he came back in 2016 and he won Murph, I mean, that was.
It doesn't get better than that.
It doesn't. It was a pinnacle of anyone's career, especially the year before. BKG won that, a non-American,
a freaking Icelander.
Exactly,
man.
And then Josh comes back, and it's just something that still gives me chills is when he's running back into the stadium, the amount of his own competitors giving him a high five, giving him fist bumps because they knew how much that meant to him, and then of course that finish. the long hair, that 5'11" vest. I mean, there's nothing more iconic than that. That's a poster. That's the only CrossFit poster that I own, is that poster right there. So for those reasons, I'm going to give the edge to John. I'm going to go Josh, but just right behind, really close to Scott.
All right, so we got we're going to recap Froning, Ben Smith, Fraser, Kliepa, Bridges, Panchik. That's our 1 through 6. That leaves Graham Holmberg and Dan Bailey in the 7 and 8 spot. John, you're going to obviously take the side of Graham Holmberg here. Why do you think Graham stands out ahead of Dan?
He's the only guy on this list to beat Rich.
He can do rope climbs.
I think winning is very significant for me. I placed way higher of an onus on 2016, doing well in 2014 to 2016 or 2015, 2016, because I feel like the whole field took a jump in fitness in those years. And then I also put an onus on winning. And you'll see this on the women's side too. The only person I have above Graham is Josh, and then all 4 of those guys won at some point. And that's why I have him above Dan. I get Scott Panchik over Graham. Looking at their resumes, I get that 100%. So I'm not going to argue for that one. But I think just the win in 2010, he was still consistent. Like he was, where's he at here? Yeah, I mean, 1st, 4th, 10th, 14th, 24th. It's not like he won and then went away. Like he stayed in the game for a significant amount of time. So that's why.
Yeah, and obviously, there's a very few champions, in the history of the sport, especially on the men's side, as we've had so many, repeat champions between, Froning, Fraser, and Medeiros in the last decade plus. Dan Bailey did not compete in 2010. He comes up 2011, wins the Open, goes to the games, finishes 6th. That's his first chance to go kind of head to head with Graham at the games, and Graham gets the better of him, finishing 4th. Over the next 4 years, Dan competed for only 5 years at the games. That was 2011 through 15. And after that first year, he beat Graham every year. In 2012, he was 6th to Graham's 10th. The next year, 8th to his 14th. The next year, Dan was 10th, which was his worst ever finish at the CrossFit Games. Graham did not make the games that year. And then the final year, 2015, Dan places 4th, his best ever finish, to Graham Holmberg's 24th, his worst ever finish. In terms of event wins, Dan had 2. They were both on the sprint course, 1 and 2 in 2015. Holmberg had 3. None of them were after 2011. He had 2010 Pyramid Double Helen and the clean ring handstand push-up, which is both very impressive. If you haven't seen the footage of those, it's definitely worth going back and watch. The finish to Pyramid Double Helen is one of the great early classic races that we had between Holmberg and Spieler, and then he wins the end one in 2011. I do think that the win weighs very heavily. I think what John said about the later years, 2014, 15, 16, being much more difficult than some of the early years, and the fact that Dan beat him by 20 spots in the last year that they both competed, for me, is enough to give Dan the edge in terms of consistency and kind of progressively getting better through this era, with his best finish coming last, as opposed to Graham, who had his best finish first, his worst finish last, and was unable to beat Dan head-to-head on the last 3 years they competed against each other.
So who's actually fitter plays a big role with you then?
That's ultimately what I mean. That's why I'm going to have to go with Brian on this, because ultimately that's what we're testing here. We're testing fitness, and
Mat Fraser should be ahead of Ben Smith.
Well, as we know, like there's no perfect solution.
Whoa, you can't change the rules for different spots.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying
we're not changing the rules. We're evaluating athletes against each other. I think that when we look at the totality of these 7 years, we both walked away from it saying, even though with Matt's entire career considered, he's, fitter than Ben. You look at what they did against each other in those 3 years. You layer in on top of it the longevity that Ben displayed and the consistency that he displayed over this period of time. Maybe one more year, if Carson had stayed one more year and Mat wins in 2017 in Carson, he's 2 on this list and Ben's 3. But at some point, we have to just accept it for what it is, which is a 7-year snapshot that we're looking at. We're blocking out everything we know from before and after about these people, and we're trying to zoom in and make an evaluation. I don't think we've been inconsistent in the way we've evaluated it. And I think that, John, you're just going to have to suck it up on this.
I know. I'm willing to budge on Dan Bailey versus Graham. I'm willing to budge on that 100%.
It's not like I don't think that Graham's not fitter. I think just evolving. Dan came in when the
He's
sport
not
was
fitter.
evolving.
Dan's way fitter than Graham.
I know, but I'm just saying the evolution,
Yeah.
the evolution of Dan. Dan, like you said, what years do you truly count?
Yeah.
2015. I mean, that's where
yeah.
Dan did great.
Absolutely.
And so,
Absolutely.
I mean, again, I don't want to dismiss what Graham accomplished. Again, he won the games. He beat Rich Froning. You know, that's a great accomplishment. And he'll always have that. But I think at the end of the day, you know, Dan Bailey has the better, you know, just the better resume outside of the championship.
So kind of cool here. At the 9 and 10 spot, totally blind. We both picked Matt Chan and then Spencer Hendel. We're not going to spend a lot of time debating anything here, but John, is there anything that you want to say about either or both of those men?
They both had really good. I mean, the longevity for both of them was pretty darn deep. Like essentially their whole careers in the Carson era. And they were almost like, this is going to sound bad, but they were like the best of the rest. Like as far as like people, you know, like you might not think of Matt Chan or Spencer Hendel when you think of the Carson era, but they were very, very good at this time. They were always in the running. They were always, they both could win events. And they were always competing with the Rich Fronings, with the Graham Holmbergs, with Jason Kalipa. They were just the best of the. I can't put it anywhere better than the best of the rest.
Oh yeah, that's well said. I think it's you know, the fact that we both had them in the same spots just kind of speaks volumes to. If you have a good understanding of the totality of what these 7 years were, Matt Chan was towards the beginning, 4th, 10th, 2nd, and 21st from 2010 to 2013. And in 2012, he was, I think, the best version that we've ever seen of him. You know, there was a pretty good list of guys that he beat that year. He managed to get 2 event wins, skills number 2 in 2011, and rope sled, which was a really impressive event win in 2012. Spencer Hendel had kind of like bookend this era. He was there in 2010, 17th, 9th the next year, 13th after that. To me, what really, really bolstered Spencer Hendel's career is his 5th place finish in 2015. He had a super
100%,
strong
100%.
into that competition on Pedal to the Metal 1 and 2, bumping him up to his career best finish. He had 4 event wins during that time: Killer Cage 2011, O Course 2012, and then both Pedal the Metal 1 and 2 in 2015. Killer Cage, if you haven't seen that event, go back into the annals, watch that. It's great. And the O Course from that was after Pendleton 1 and 2 in 2012. If nothing else, please go watch the last heat of the men. It was like a round robin elimination style, 4 guys left at the end. I won't spoil anything for you other than the fact that Spencer got the event win, but it's pretty iconic heat of guys there. So that rounds out our
handedly
top 10.
too, didn't he?
Well, I don't want to say.
I'm pretty sure he won without like contest. He was ahead of everybody by a lot.
The guy who got second was close to him for about 2/3 of it. Then he pulled away. But yeah, Spencer's athleticism really, really showed through there, and that was, you know, he's got you know, he's a great athlete from that era, and he rounds out our top 10. So the next group of guys here is it's going to get a little bit messier. I think that it does speak volumes to those 10 guys that we were so consistent in our picks and placements.
It ended up being right at 10. That's cool. Like
yeah,
top 10 was pretty solidified, and it's all haywire.
So what we're going to do here, we got a bunch of different colors on the screen. Don't worry too much about that. Basically, we're going to start with the oranges there towards the top. So we got Kyle Kasperbauer. I had him 11th. You had him 12th. Before we talk about him, I think that it's pretty fair for us to just kind of place him 11th here.
That's fine. Yeah, if we don't disagree, like we don't really disagree, and we do disagree hard on Hebner. So
yeah, let's lock in Kasperbauer at 11, and he competed 3 times. 3rd place in 2012 was his best year there. 2013 he was 20th. 2014 he was 13th. And he got a win on Double Banger in 2012. Is there anything else you want to say about Kyle?
Shortest arms in the game.
And obviously, of course, also a very prominent member in the community in general, gone on to compete in the Masters divisions, has coached and competed with teams. He's been an ambassador of the sport for a long time. Moving on from here, I think that some of the next guys here on our list that we might need to cipher through, I do want to give you a chance to make a case for Jacob Hebner to be as high as you want on the list. I think that right now we're basically looking at, can he usurp guys like Austin Malleolo and BKG right in this time frame or area on the board. So let's look at Hepner, BKG, and Malleolo.
Okay. So for Hepner, the reason I have him so high, so he was a rookie in 2014, and he got 18th, and then he got 10th in 2015, and then he got 7th in 2016. He is one of the only guys on this list that was improving year after year as the competition got harder. Like the field of competition got way better during this era, and his placement was better in each subsequent
year.
Subsequent year.
That's a great. Well, pause for a second there, John. That's a great point. I do want to just highlight that you have Cole Sager at 16th, and in those same 3 years, Cole Sager beat Jacob Hepner and got consistently better every year. But you chose to have him 5 spots lower on your list.
Yep.
So how does that work?
Hold on. I'm looking for him.
Cole Sager 2014 was 17th to Hepner's 18th.
I got it. I just like Hepner better. That's why. So if you want to put Cole there, that's fine. I think Cole and Hepner both deserve to be. So like as high as I have Hepner, I think Cole deserves to be that high too.
Okay, so let me ask you this then, because
both
you
better
had
than Malleolo and BKG. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, well, based on what you said about Hepner, I don't think that there's any way that we can put him ahead of Sager. So wherever Hepner falls on this list, I think we're going to have Sager 1 spot higher than him. Just for anyone who's following along, in the same 3 years, which are the only 3 years that Cole Sager and Jacob Hepner competed together, the first year, 2014, Sager was 17th, Hepner was 18th. The next year, Sager was 7th, Hepner was 10th, and the 2016, Sager was 5th, and Hepner was 7th. So their resumes during this time period are very similar. Hepner did have 2 event wins, Midline Madness 2015, Handstand Walk 2016, to Cole Sager's 1 event win, the Separator in 2016. So I think it's very fair for us to have them back-to-back on the list with Cole 1 spot ahead of Hepner. The question is where we're going to have them.
Okay, so let me argue those guys over Malleolo then. Okay.
Yep.
So you have Malleolo there for, I'm guessing, longevity.
Yep.
His best spot was 6th, and that was in 2010. And then he was 18th, 8th, 41st, 34th, didn't make it. So there was a clear jump in field, and he couldn't hang, for lack of a better word. Everybody got better than him. And so if his best placement was 6th, and Cole's best placement was 5th in the hardest year that there was, and Hepner's best placement was 7th in the hardest year, that I don't think there's any question that their fitness is miles above Malleolo as far as just that guy versus that guy. Let's see who wins in a workout. Unless there's a deadlift involved, I don't know if Malleolo could win one workout versus those 2 guys. Unless there's a deadlift involved, then Malleolo would definitely win that workout. But his longevity is great, but the drop off for me just puts Hepner and Cole ahead of them just because they're better. They did it for 3 years. They're improving. Malleolo's not improving. His best years were his best year was 2010, which is the easiest year in this era. And that's why I think those guys are ahead of Malleolo.
Okay. So let's throw Noam Olsen into the mix here, because Noah Olsen also competed the same 3 years as Sager and Hepner. His event finishes by year were 8th, 8th, and 15th. So while he wasn't getting better than those guys during that time period, he was kind of at a bit of a plateau. That 15th is the worst performance of his career. He didn't have any event wins. I think we definitely have to have Noah Olsen below Sager and Hepner. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Do you think Noah Olsen gets the nod ahead of Malleolo?
I do, but not as much though.
Okay, so I would agree with that, and I think the last kind of, for me, the last guy in this, the next guy I want to evaluate here is BKG. Similarly to Sager, Hepner, and Olsen, he shows up in 2014, 26th place. That's his worst event finish. He bounces back with an event win in Murph and a 3rd place podium finish, and then rounds out this era with an 8th place finish. Does he get the nod ahead of Malleolo?
I'd put him over Olsen, and then that's where I would put him.
So we're going to have BKG over Olsen, but behind Hepner and Sager.
Yeah, just because his they were both. Hepner and Cole are both
he has the
better
best
than him
finish, but he also has the worst finish, and he doesn't show the same consistent improvement. There's not really any kind of separation between these guys in terms of overall event wins. It's a pretty fine line, but in this case, you're valuing the consistent improvement of Sager and Hepner over the one great year of BKG.
Yeah.
I can get behind that. There's, in my opinion, there are two other guys that we have to put into the equation at this point, because they also had short tenures during this time, but they were very good during the time they were there. And I think at this point, we're going to be evaluating. Basically, we're trying to see where Malleolo is going to shake out. How do you see him with 5 event finishes, including a 6th and an 8th in the early years, stacking up against guys like Chad McKay and Marcus Hendren?
That's rough.
This is tough. So Chad McKay has three appearances at the games, 12th, 9th, and 11th. It's very consistent. Those were in years 2010, 12, and 13. We know Malleolo has more appearances. He has 2 finishes that are better than McKay ever had. He also beat him head-to-head in those years. In 2013, McKay got 11th to Malleolo's 41st, and then McKay never competes again as an individual. Marcus Hendren only has 2 years competing, incredibly good in both those years. Is that right? I feel like I have data entry there wrong.
It feels like he's been there longer than that. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's 7th and 6th in those 2 years. His only 2 appearances at the games. So I think we're filling out this area here. What do you think? Malleolo, McKay, or Hendren? What order?
I have my thoughts. You might disagree. I think Hendren. I would go Hendren, McKay, and then Malleolo. Reason for it. So that 2010 finish, again, we talked about 2010. The lower placement you get, like, it's almost a double whammy. Like, Graham's win did not do much for you, right? Like, you still thought all those guys were ahead of Graham. His win didn't do much for you. Why? Because it was 2010, and and I probably could make the games in 2010. Like, it's not the barrier to entry is not very high, right? So if the barrier to entry is not very high, if the winning 2010 doesn't mean that much, 12th place for dang sure doesn't mean that much. So, like, I don't even count it really. Like, it doesn't give much water other than you made the games in 2010. And then if you look at it, and then I'm just thinking, so who's fitter, right? Between Hendren and McKay, if we just look at the 2012, 2013, Hendren's 7th and 6th, McKay's 9th and 11th, Malleolo's 8th and 41st. And then Malleolo just stayed in it. I think if Hendren and McKay stayed in it, they would have been in there longer. But yeah, I'm just thinking who is fitter versus those guys. If you want to put up Malleolo higher because of his longevity, I get it. But Hendren gave us some moments.
Absolutely. And for people who don't know, Marcus Hendren was competing out of the Central East region. It was by far the most difficult region on the men's side to qualify through during that time period. In the years that he did make it, he had 6th and 7th place finishes. All 3 of those guys were at the games both of those years. He beat McKay and Malleolo head-to-head. It was very close, 7th, 8th, 9th in the first year. But in the second year, 6th, 11th, and 41st, with both of the other guys dropping off and him improving by a little bit against a pretty good field. So I think that's totally fine. So what we're going to have here is Kasperbauer 11, Cole Sager 12, Jacob Hepner 13, BKG 14, Noah Olsa 15, Hendren 16, McKay 17, Malleolo 18.
I like that.
Okay,
that's a big drop off from where you guys, because if you look at looking at what you have here, you had Austin at 12th,
and he had him 14th.
Yeah, 14th. So that's 2 spots. I mean, just basically 1 spot between the 2, and then he drops down to 18.
And I think it's a good lesson for people who are weighing in on this. And honestly, this has been a good lesson for me over time. Mm-hmm. It's really easy. This is a good lesson for people who program as well. It's really easy to sit by your computer and come up with something and feel totally justified in your whatever you've put down on paper when it's just you. The reason why I like doing these things with John and other experts in the space is because in this case, by having that dialogue back and forth, both of us were able to kind of reevaluate. We both placed Malleolo pretty highly here. By the way, I apologize. I'm missing an L in his name on our spreadsheet. We'll fix that. But, we, upon further look at it and having that conversation, we were able to, I think, more accurately assess the situation and ultimately come up with a better placement he won't think so, but a better placement for him there relative to the other performances that did actually happen during this time. John, do you feel good through 18 at this point?
Yeah, I do. I agree with everything y'all just said. Yeah.
All right, we're gonna throw a couple guys into the mix this is big time wild cards in terms of this process overall. I did not even have Pat Vellner and Brent Fikowski on this list of top 25 originally. John and I each submitted 25 names, knowing that there would be a little bit of discrepancy and we'd get pretty close to 30 guys by the end of it, which is the number that we wanted. He had them 15th and 17th. Obviously, we already have 18 on the list. So basically, John's going to make an argument here for Vellner and Fikowski to round out the top 20. And I'm going to suggest that the other guys that are really close to this threshold on the leaderboard are Chris Spieler and Marcus Philly. John, let's see why do you think with only one appearance, Vellner and Fikowski can earn a spot this high up on the board?
So the big guys that we're talking about right now are Marcus Philly and Chris Spieler versus these two.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think if I'm looking here,
Not Alex Anderson.
Well, you didn't even have him on your list. I had him 21st. I feel like you had Philly 20th. I had Spieler 19th. So let's focus on the guys that we both had on the list.
Okay. My reasoning is because 2016, Vellner and Fikowski both have the most significant placement out of any of these guys, and by far, like their best placement is in the hardest year. Chris Spieler's the only one who can argue anything because he got third in 2010, which we previously talked about. Philly's best placement was 12th in 2016. His other two were 37th and 25th. So 37th and 25th, I'm supposed to give Marcus Philly credit because he made the games, and then 37th, he tied his shoes for all the events. Like I don't give much credit for going to the games getting 37th. And then I'm also thinking
oh, you placed him 20th.
Yeah, because the other one's 25th and 12th. I mean, he still got 12th in 2016, which is better than most of the guys on the list that we're currently talking about. The guys we're currently talking about, that's better than most everybody other than Vellner and Fikowski.
Well, it's not as good as Alex Anderson, and you didn't have him in your top 25 originally.
All right, calm down. If Alex Anderson is 13th and 11th, and those are his only 2 years, you're telling me a 13th and 11th is more significant than third place in 2016? Than making the podium in 2016, 13th and 11th. I'm also thinking, who had the most impact? I think that 1 year for Fikowski and Vellner had more impact in the CrossFit space, or talked about in the CrossFit space, than Alex Anderson's 13th and 11th.
Let me ask you about. I think I'm going to ultimately agree with you. I think that Fikowski and Vellner are very good fits in the 19 and 20 spot. And the more that I look at kind of the other athletes that we're debating in that range, I do think that those performances in that year hold up. Do you think that there's any argument for Fikowski ahead of Vellner here?
No. How?
I just, just when, that thing that you said at the end about impact overall, that year, even though Vellner gets on the podium, it's by a super small margin. But Brent Fikowski, much in the mindset of what you argued for Josh Bridges earlier on the conversation, he still maintains the 4 spot all time amongst men for total event wins, and half
not at the time.
No, currently, but more than half of those, 4 of his 7 event wins in his career come in his rookie year in 2016. And what we were talking about with Josh is that he had an ability to win in a diverse array of events. The events that Brent won were 100%, which was like a 2.5-minute event, the climbing snail, the ranch mini chipper, and rope chipper. Now, there is some running involved, some machine work involved, some ropes involved, climbing and pulling. So there may be some similarities you could discern across those 4 events.
Didn't he win the snail event?
Climbing snail, yeah.
Okay.
So he proved his ability to win fast events with powerful explosive movements, to run up and down a berm, to run up and down a hill, to do GHGs, wall balls, machine work good enough with everyone else, dominate a sled pull, and he had 4 wins. Like, the only other people on this entire list with 4 wins or more is Spencer Hendel and Josh Bridges and Rich Froning. Is there an argument, even though he finished behind Vellner that year, that maybe he could be 1 spot ahead of him on this list?
Yeah, no, it's a good valid argument. Yeah,
valid.
Absolutely.
I also think you got to look at the regional that he came out of too. The Northeast regional.
No,
You
we're
know,
only focused on the games.
No,
I know, I understand, but just saying his way to get to the games was a lot harder. And the
he
previous
dominated
year,
the regional that year. It wasn't that hard for him. He
I know,
got
but
first place by a lot.
I'm talking about the previous year though, when he didn't make it. That was a pretty stacked regional too. So,
All right, so
know.
we're gonna put Vellner and Fikowski 19 and 20. Do we want to put to credit Vellner beating him, even though he did very little that was memorable that year, or do we want to give Fikowski? I mean, he really didn't.
He was
there
second in
live.
climbing snail.
I know I was there live at the games. It was my first year going to the CrossFit games, and I remember sitting there, and every event I was like, okay, Froning, Fraser, Smith, Vellner again. He's like 5th, 6th, 8th, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. Like every event, he was top 10. He never won anything. He was incredibly consistent, but he just kind of had this under the radar. Next thing you know, he's 3rd place. Whereas Fikowski, everyone knew who Fikowski was because he was winning pretty much an event per day.
I honestly love the argument. I really do. But if Vellner beat him, like I don't know.
No.
I don't know how.
I think that we have to. I think we do have to honor that, and we're going to. But I did think it was worth bringing it up.
100%. I love the argument.
So
what happened in 2017? Pat was 4th.
Well, we'll get to that down the road.
No, I know. I'm saying if it went out one more year,
if it went out one more year, I think we definitely have Fikowski ahead of Vellner here. But in 100%. That 1 year, despite the fact that Brent had all those things, and I do think it's fun to talk about. I'm glad that we did, and that you guys thought so too. But I think we know that it pays to win. And at the end of the weekend, Pat had more points than Brent. Pat stood on the podium. Brent did not. And we've already talked that the podium plays big. So we're going to give Vellner the 19 spot, Fikowski the 20.
We got surprised you agreed so hard on me with that one.
Yeah. So we got 10 guys.
Out of the list. Go ahead. Sorry.
10 guys left to filter through here. You can see who those 10 are. And this is probably where we have kind of the biggest kind of job to do. I don't want to spend a ton of time here, but just kind of looking at this list, John, of the remaining guys, are there any one or two that you think definitely have a resume that kind of deserves to be placed towards the top of this group of 10?
I'm good with Spieler.
Okay.
If you just want to put Spieler at 21st, I'm fine with that. He's got the highest placement out of any of these guys. And if you want to talk about impact on the sport, he is the OG little man that everybody wants to do well. And that card is played so successful when it's always popular. Everybody's going to root for that guy. Josh Bridges was that guy, and now Colton Mertens is that guy. That guy is the most lovable guy you can, and he's the OG, that guy. So I'm fine with putting him 21st. Yeah, the people's champ. That's great. Yeah, wonderful.
Now, moving on from there, I think we should look at Alex Anderson. He only had 2 years. 13th and 11th is pretty good. And when I'm looking at these guys, I think we also have to talk about Tommy Hackenbrook. You had Tommy as the kind of last spot in. I think I had him just off my list. He does have a 9th in 2010 and a pretty strong 6th place finish in his last year as an individual in 2014. Do you feel like these are kind of two guys to come up next on the list, or do you favor someone with more appearances?
I think we should talk about Rob Forte.
Okay.
With those guys.
Yeah,
and I'm good with those three. I'm good with having those three next, and we can talk about the order on those three.
Rob had 6 consecutive CrossFit Games appearances during this time period. He showed up in 2011, took 30th, then 35th, and 33rd. So not great in his first 3 years, but he was consistently there. 12th place in 2014 being his best performance during this time period. Hackenbrook competed in that year and beat him. He took 6th. The next year, no Hackenbrook, but Forte shows up again. He slides back down to 23rd, and Alex Anderson shows up at the games and takes 13th. And in the following year, Forte 17th to Anderson's 11th, no Hackenbrook. Hackenbrook obviously has a 9th, what we mentioned, from 2010 and a 23rd from 2011. So what do you think amongst these three? Who are you in favor of?
I get Alex Anderson's fitter. I get that. But the longevity argument has more water for me whenever the other person is in 3rd place. Mm-hmm. Like if you're 11th place, your finishes, even though it's in the harder era, like it doesn't hold as much water because it's not even the top 10, right? And then the longevity for me goes ahead of top place finish or being fitter than when you're not in the top 10 or top 5, right? And then if you're in the top 5, like Vellner, Bukowski's case, top 4, then I think that holds way more water because of the difficulty to do that. So like I would put Forte ahead of
well, let me
Alex
throw one
Anderson.
other name in the mix in that case, and I think we have to consider Neil Maddox, because Neil had 6 appearances during this time period as well. He did withdraw from the games in his last year, which was 2015. But in the years prior to that, if you just look at his first 3 appearances compared to Rob's, he was 25th, 32nd, and 20th. Now, these are all 1 year before, which is better than Rob's 30th, 35th, and 33rd. His best finish was a 9th place in 2013. Rob's best finish is 12th the next year. His second best finish is 15th. Rob's best is 17th. Now, Rob's finish comes in that 2016.
Rob's best is 12th.
12th and 17th. Maddox has 9th and 15th.
Yeah.
So do you think there's an argument for Neil ahead of Rob here, as if we're playing the longevity card? In addition to that, Neil has 4 event wins during that time period. Rob has 1.
I don't. I'm going to put Neil right below Rob, but because Rob was getting better in the harder era, Neil was fading.
Well, they competed twice
in
against
that
each
same
other.
Era. Yeah, but Rob wasn't full on Rob yet. He didn't go into his final form yet. Brian, I'm like,
he didn't level up yet.
I think it's very close. But like, I'm looking at that 2013 year.
Let's just look at triple 3, and we'll pick the highest placement in that. We'll go in order of that as far as who we put ahead of who.
PC, any opinion here between Rob Forte and Neil Maddox?
I don't know. Just initially when I think, just Neil Maddox sticks out to me just because of just the sled, iconic sled. Just some of these events, he just stood out. And yeah, he had some bad finishes, but when he was performing, he stood out. And Forte, Rob, just nothing really sticks out in any of his appearances when it came to me, outside of him being him and Con Porter being the Australian representatives back then, and
Chad
Zeke
McKay.
Chad McKay and Zeke and Swanee but I think Neil Maddox, just the way he was built, just everything about him. I always thought he was a better athlete than his results showed, especially.
I agree with that. I think he was fitter than what he.
Yeah.
All right, John, you're gonna have to bite the bullet on this one. We're giving Maddox the nod over Forte.
Yeah.
All right, and then I'm good with Alex Anderson, and then Tommy Hackenbrook after that.
Okay, that's perfect, and I like that as well. That brings us to 25. So just to recap those last couple, we had Vellner and Fikowski 19 and 20, Spieler 21, Maddox 22, Forte 23, Alex Anderson 24, Hackenbrook 25, and that brings us to our final 5 men. I'm just going to kind of list them off here, and then John, at this point, based on everything we've talked about, you kind of tell me which 1 or 2 guys you think emerges from these 5. We got Ben Stoneberg, Marcus Philly, Albert Dominic LaRouche, Nate Schrader, and Lucas Parker.
This is tough.
Well, I'll kick us off here.
You're going to say,
I'm looking for if there's a combination of impressive finishes. And I think that amongst these guys, when you're kind of splitting hairs, I see Stoneberg with a 16th and a 9th in 2013 and 2014. Is a pretty impressive combo of finishes here. And I see Nate Schrader a couple years earlier with a 14th and a 12th. Those kind of stand out to me compared to the finishes from the other guys.
Yeah, I'd go Stoneberg, Schrader, and then Lucas Parker, Philly, Albert Dominic LaRouche.
All right, let's just pause for 1 second. So we're going to, I think that the Stoneberg and Schrader makes sense. And just to recap there, Ben Stoneberg had 4 years during this time period. He was 20th as a rookie in 2011. Comes back 2 years later, takes 16th. Next year after that, 9th, a top 10 finish. So he's getting better across these periods of time. He misses the year after that, and in 2016, 28th. So he pretty much falls off after 2014. But a strong showing against a decent field, especially in 2013 and 14, which were some iconic years. He hung really tight against some super fit guys, especially in push-pull. If Rich and Matt get a lot of the Rich and Josh get a lot of the.
Yeah, he was leading about 90% of that event.
Yeah, it was very good. And Ben Stoneberg, if you weren't a fan back then, you may not know who he is. Same thing with Nate Schrader. Nate Schrader, 14th and 12th, like I said, in 2011 and 12. He had 3 event wins during that time, which is pretty good. Like we said, there's only a handful of people on this list with 4. Those were in the broad jump and the sprint in 2012 and the sprint carry in 2014. I do like Lucas Parker at 28. That he had 6 consecutive games appearances. Obviously, we know longevity plays. His best finishes were 2015, 14th, 2012, 15th. He had a 19th, a 22nd, a 26th, and a 34th with a event win, or tied for an event win in 2013 in the clean and jerk ladder. If you haven't seen that event, that's a fun event to go back and watch. Asia Barta, Lucas Parker, Rich Froning, Jason Kalipa put on quite a show. I think at the last
you also
spot
get
here,
to see how much the sport has evolved, because 345 is the win.
Mhm.
Everybody can
and
do
as it
that
should,
now.
that's 10 years ago now. But it was also kind of the first of any iteration of these lifting ladders with the Olympic lifts at the games. I think it was kind of the first iconic one. I mean, there was the ranch deadlift ladder, but this is obviously a more dynamic lift. And it was quite a spectacle that Dave had there. He had, anyway, good event to go back and review. For the last 2 spots here, you said Philly and then Albert Dominic LaRouche. I'm looking at LaRouche, 5 appearances, 1 withdraw, best finish of 12th. That's 2013. Philly, 3 appearances, 1 finish of best also of 12th in 2016. LaRouche wins the squat clean period in 2016. Marcus Philly
That's
never
Alex
won an event.
Anderson. You got that wrong.
I thought we had Alex Anderson in 24th.
No. Alex Anderson won the squat clean pyramid in 2016.
Okay. Sorry, moving things around.
Yeah. I
Anyway.
just went with who's fitter here. You can put that however you want it. I just the 12th in 2016 holds
Albert
more water.
Dominic LaRouche did have 1 win at the CrossFit Games. It was a med ball handstand push-up in 2011. Anyway, I think splitting hairs here at the end, but I do think that the 12th in 2016 is a pretty strong finish for Philly compared to Albert Dominic LaRouche's in 2013. So we'll give Philly the 29 and Albert Dominic LaRouche the ultimate spot on the list at 30. Any discrepancies from you guys?
No, I think it's funny how much the list changed from what I originally had, and I agree. I feel like it's a much better list than I had originally.
I feel the same. I think that this is it's a good exercise for me, and I hopefully for you guys it's a good opportunity to see kind of the process and just to have that understanding. Whether it's something like this that's kind of a fun thing that we're doing to give a little homage to a generation at the CrossFit Games, but more practically for a lot of people out there, if you're programming for your affiliate, if you're programming for a competition, this is just a good kind of insight into what bouncing in ideas off of someone who's got maybe a similar level of expertise in an area, but a slightly different perspective. It's kind of the old adage that 2 heads are better than 1. I feel like both of our lists, that this list collectively is a better representation of where these guys actually filter out relative to what either one of us came up with on our own. Obviously, the article's already out, so you guys will have seen this list. This is the generation of it. This is the genesis of it, how it came to be. So the list that you guys saw on the articles was not our lists originally, and this is what we did to come up with the order that we ultimately put forward as the best 30 men during the Carson era of the CrossFit Games.
It's crazy that we had Neil Maddox was 29th and the Enzo 22nd. That's pretty insane.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There were some guys that took some hits and slid down. There were some guys that rose up a little bit. I think that just talking through that process and realizing, kind of the value of those later years, how we were assessing longevity versus excellence, and some of the small ways that we ended up making those decisions played favorably to someone like Neil, who didn't only have 5-6 years appearances, 5 times he finished the games, and a couple good finishes to his credit. So he was kind of hitting well on both of those metrics that ended up being kind of deciding factors at the bottom third of this list. I think it's also just worth acknowledging, there's obviously making this list in any capacity is a huge honor. There was obviously way more than 30 men that competed during this time. There's tons of other athletes that aren't on this list that had phenomenal careers and performances in individual years, individual events, or kind of across the totality of that time period. I spoke about when I did the Ranch Era Top 10 that I like to go back and look at the history of the CrossFit Games every year to some degree as I'm preparing for this year's version of the games. And I think that John does something pretty similarly. Patrick, do you got any kind of closing thoughts for us about what's going on here or what people can expect to see coming up?
No, I think this is a great opportunity, like you said, to allow our fans, the people who kind of peek behind the curtain and see what analysts actually do. I mean, obviously myself, Brian, John, we're on the phone for hours talking about stuff like this, but this is part of the process that many people don't get to see. So this is a real treat for people to kind of see how it comes down. That even though there are differing opinions, that ultimately the goal is to come out one unique, one comprehensive list. And you guys have done that just by talking through and just reevaluating some of the things you might have missed, or putting things in different perspective. And I think that's a really important part about being an analyst and someone in our field, is putting things in perspective and not just depending on your way is the right way. We're all in this together, and I think you guys did a good job of showing that. And I think that's why this list right here, there hasn't been anything like this before, and I think this is why this is one reason why we haven't had anything like this, is because people haven't gotten together and just sat down and talked stuff out. So, once again, it's great stuff. I can't wait. Obviously the story's up right now, but please, when you get an opportunity to see the video or on our social media channels, let us know, let Brian know, let John know who you disagree or agree with, or if there's someone we missed out on.
John, any closing thoughts about the Carson Era, the best 30 men from those 7 years, iconic years of the CrossFit Games?
No, it was an honor to be a part of this. I'm glad we got to talk through it. I like Patrick said, I kind of look at it like it's like barbershop talk, but for CrossFit nerds. And I'm looking forward to Madison. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but I had a blast.
No. Yeah, absolutely.
We still got the women to talk about too.
Oh, we still have the women. Yeah, my bad.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to the women then.
That's going to be a good one. That's going to be a good one. I can't wait for that one. So this kind of sets the tone for the women, and now people know what to expect.
So if you haven't seen, head over to B.Friendly Fitness. I did the Ranch Era on my own, top 10 men, top 10 women. Obviously, these are the 30 men that we selected from the Carson Era of the CrossFit Games. Coming up, you're going to see the top 30 women. We'll have a similar thing where the articles will be counting down towards the top, and then the video component will be very similar to this. Obviously, we are also getting ready for the CrossFit Games. There's going to be tons of cool content coming out. We're trying to do some stuff that you can maybe predict, and some other stuff that'll be kind of new and fun. I'm going to steal the closing from Patrick here. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe our stuff. Check out the links in the bios. Head over to B.Friendly Fitness. Check us out on Instagram. If you want to support us, following us on Patreon, becoming a supporter there. We got some cool new stuff and opportunities for our Patreon supporters. And we'll be back in a bit. And until then, be friendly, our friends.